CEO was shocked to see his arranged marriage be his maid. What happened next? A powerful young CEO walks into a private wedding, expecting a stranger, but freezes when he realizes his arranged bride is the quiet maid from his own house. He thinks it's a setup, a humiliation. But for her, this marriage is freedom. She's been hiding from a violent past, living under a false name just to survive. Then, one night, a small boy steps forward and whispers something that changes everything. Now the marriage meant to control him is turning him into her only shield. Secrets are closing in. Danger is coming back. And love was never part of the deal. So when the past finally finds them, will he walk away to save himself, or risk everything to protect the family he never expected to have? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. Dawn crept over the city skyline, painting the executive office windows in shades of pale gold. Caleb Whitmore stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, his reflection a dark silhouette against the brightening sky. His fingers drummed against the thick manila envelope on his desk, the latest revision of the marriage contract that would seal his fate. He loosened his tie slightly, allowing himself this small rebellion against the perfect image he maintained. The office still held the pristine emptiness of early morning, but his mind was anything but quiet. The board's ultimatum echoed in his thoughts: marry within the month or lose control of the company his grandfather had built. Another sleepless night, Mr. Whitmore? His assistant's voice came through the intercom, startling him from his brooding. Send in the morning reports, Janet. He replied, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality he'd perfected over years of board meetings. Down on the same floor, Aisha Monroe worked methodically through her cleaning routine, her movements careful and precise. The steady swish of her cleaning cloth against glass provided a rhythm to her racing thoughts. She'd chosen the early morning shift deliberately. Fewer people meant fewer questions, fewer chances for someone to look too closely at her face and remember it. The lawyer's words from yesterday still rang in her ears. This arrangement will give you a new legal identity. Your ex-husband won't be able to trace you or your son. She closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself to feel the weight of hope those words carried. As sunlight filled more of the building, Caleb settled into his leather chair, scanning through the marriage contract one more time. The terms were clear: a business arrangement, nothing more. The board had selected a suitable candidate, someone who would satisfy their traditional values while maintaining the company's image. His phone buzzed with a message from the family lawyer. Ceremony confirmed for 7 p.m. today. All parties in. Agreement. Caleb's jaw tightened. All parties in agreement. As if he had any real choice in the matter. The trust his grandfather had established gave the board unprecedented control over his personal life, a fact they wielded like a weapon. He thought of his mother's words at their last dinner. It's for the best, darling. The company needs stability. Meanwhile, Aisha finished the last window, her reflection barely visible in the spotless glass. Her hands shook slightly as she packed away her cleaning supplies. In just 12 hours, she would have a new name, a new life, a shield of legal protection around herself and her son, Tommy. She thought of her little boy, safely tucked away at her neighbor's apartment, probably still sleeping. Just one more day of hiding, she whispered to herself, touching the fading bruise on her wrist, a final reminder of the life she was leaving behind. The morning progressed with Caleb buried in meetings, his exterior showing none of the turmoil beneath. In each conference room, he was the picture of corporate success. Tailored suit, commanding presence, decisive words. Nobody would guess that in hours he would be legally bound to a stranger. The PR team has prepared a statement about the wedding, Janet informed him between meetings. They want your approval before the evening announcement. Caleb waved it away. It doesn't matter. Just make sure it aligns with the board's narrative. He paused, then added, "And Janet, clear my schedule after 4. I need some time to prepare." As the day advanced, Aisha completed her shift and hurried home to her small apartment. She had carefully planned every detail: the simple dress she would wear, the documents she needed to bring, the neighbor who would watch Tommy. Everything had to be perfect. She couldn't risk any mistakes. In her tiny bathroom, she studied her reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed both familiar and strange, someone caught between past and future, between fear and hope. She touched her dark hair, recently cut shorter to change her appearance, and practiced the new name she would soon carry legally. Back in his office, Caleb stood once again at the window, watching the sun arc across the sky. The city below hummed with activity, oblivious to the private dramas playing out in the towers above. He thought about the woman he would meet that evening, a stranger chosen by others, someone who fit the board's criteria for a suitable CEO's wife. His phone buzzed again. "Car will pick you up at 6:30. Chapel prepared, as discussed." The message was from his father's attorney. Always the messenger for family matters, too important for direct communication. As sunset approached, both Caleb and Aisha prepared for the evening ahead. In his penthouse apartment, Caleb methodically dressed in a dark suit, each movement precise and controlled. He had accepted this fate months ago, but the reality of it still felt surreal. Her modest apartment, Aisha hugged Tommy tightly before leaving him with her elderly neighbor. "Mommy has an important meeting," she explained, using the simple words they had practiced. "When I come back, things will be better for us." The sky turned deep orange as day prepared to surrender to night. Caleb stood in his home office, adjusting his cufflinks, his grandfather's, worn for occasions that would have made the old man proud, or at least satisfied. Across the city, Aisha smoothed her dress and checked her small bag one last time, ensuring she had every document the lawyer had requested. Her hand trembled slightly as she locked her apartment door, each step taking her closer to a new identity, a new chance at life. Neither knew they were preparing for the same event, their separate paths about to converge in ways they couldn't imagine. As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows between the buildings, both stepped out into the evening, each believing they understood exactly what lay ahead. The courthouse's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across polished marble floors as Caleb stood rigidly in the small ceremony room. His dark suit felt suffocating, matching his mood. The clock on the wall ticked past 7:30 in the evening, each second amplifying his resentment at being forced into this arrangement. Judge Martinez shuffled papers at her desk, barely glancing up. "We'll proceed once your bride arrives, Mr. Whitmore." Caleb's jaw clenched. He'd expected some socialite's daughter, someone chosen by the board to strengthen business ties. The door creaked open behind him, and he turned, ready to face whatever calculating woman they'd selected. His world tilted sideways. There, in a simple cream-colored dress, stood Aisha Munro, the quiet woman who cleaned his office every morning before dawn. She held herself carefully, hands clasped tightly in front of her, but her chin was lifted with quiet determination. "This is some kind of joke," Caleb said, his voice dropping dangerously low. The familiar face before him didn't match any of his expectations. His mind raced through possibilities. Was this manipulation? Had she somehow engineered this? "No joke, Mr. Whitmore," Aisha replied softly, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "I understand this is unexpected." The judge looked between them. "Do you two need a moment before we proceed?" "Yes," Caleb bit out, gesturing sharply to a corner of the room. Aisha followed him, maintaining careful distance. Up close, he could see the shadows under her eyes, partially hidden by minimal makeup. "Explain," he demanded, keeping his voice low but intense. "How did my cleaning staff end up as my arranged bride?" Aisha met his gaze directly, something he'd never seen her do in all the months she'd worked in his building. "This marriage isn't about ambition or money, Mr. Whitmore. It's about survival." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I need the legal protection this arrangement provides. Nothing more." The raw honesty in her voice made him pause. She continued, "I don't expect anything from you. Not money, not attention, not even acknowledgement. Just the legal shield of your name." Caleb studied her face, looking for signs of deception, but finding only exhaustion and resolve. "You're running from something," he stated flatly. "Someone," she corrected quietly. "And yes." His anger deflated slightly, replaced by confusion and an unexpected twinge of concern. "The board arranged this?" "Your family's lawyers did. They found me through the system that helps." She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "They said you needed a wife for inheritance reasons. I needed a new identity. It seemed mutually beneficial." The clinical way she described it struck a chord with Caleb. This wasn't the scheming he'd feared. It was a business arrangement, plain and simple. He could understand that. "If we do this," he said, slowly, "it stays exactly what it is, a legal contract. Nothing more." "That's all I ask." Aisha agreed immediately. "I'll continue my work, live my life separately. You'll barely know I exist." Judge Martinez cleared her throat. "Are we ready to proceed?" They returned to the desk, standing further apart than most couples would on their wedding day. The ceremony was brief and austere. No flowers, no music, no witnesses beyond the required court clerk. The judge's words echoed hollowly in the sparse room. "Do you, Caleb James Whitmore, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was firm but emotionless. "Do you, Aisha Marie Monroe, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Her response was quiet but clear. They signed the marriage certificate with steady hands, his signature bold and sharp, hers neat and contained. The scratch of pen on paper seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. "Congratulations," the judge said without enthusiasm. "You're legally married." Caleb nodded curtly, already reaching for his phone to call his driver. Aisha gathered her small purse, holding it close like a shield. The sleek black car waited outside, its interior lights casting a soft glow on the leather seats. Caleb held the door open, ingrained manners rather than intimacy, and Aisha slipped inside, immediately moving to the far window. He entered and sat opposite, leaving the middle seat as a neutral zone between them. The car pulled away from the courthouse, carrying its passengers into the night. Neither spoke. Caleb stared at his phone, responding to emails as if this were any other evening. Aisha watched the city lights blur past her window, her reflection ghost-like against the glass. They were married now, bound by law and paper, but the space between them on the seat might as well have been an ocean. The ring on Aisha's finger felt foreign and heavy, while Caleb had opted not to wear one at all. Their breaths fell into different rhythms, their gazes never met, and the silence grew thicker with each passing mile. The car's gentle hum filled the void where wedding day joy should have been, carrying a CEO and his cleaning staff, now legally bound but emotionally worlds apart, through the darkening streets of the city. Their shared future stretched ahead like the road before them, mapped out but uncertain, connected but separate. A path neither had chosen, but both now had to walk. The sleek black car pulled up to the Whitmore estate, just as night settled over the manicured grounds. Moonlight caught the edges of the marble columns, casting long shadows across the circular driveway. Inside the vehicle, the silence between Caleb and Aisha felt as solid as the wall of leather and wood dividing the back seat. Caleb exited first, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel. After a moment's hesitation, he extended his hand to help Aisha out, a gesture born of ingrained manners rather than warmth. Aisha accepted it with the briefest touch, her fingers trembling slightly before withdrawing into the folds of her simple dress. The grand house loomed before them, its windows glowing with warm light that somehow failed to feel welcoming. Caleb cleared his throat. "I'll have the staff dismissed for the evening. Privacy seems appropriate." Aisha nodded, clutching her small bag closer. "Thank you." Inside, Caleb moved efficiently through the rooms, speaking quietly to the handful of evening staff. Soon the sound of closing doors and retreating footsteps echoed through the marble halls, leaving behind a heavy silence. "The dining room is this way," Caleb said stiffly, gesturing down the hall. "I assumed you'd be hungry." The massive dining table, set for two at opposite ends, made the distance between them even more obvious. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, throwing rainbow patterns on the stark white tablecloth. A server had left covered dishes before, departing. Aisha sat carefully, her movements measured and quiet. The scraping of Caleb's chair seemed unnaturally loud in the empty room. For several minutes, the only sounds were the quiet clink of silverware and the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. "I think we should discuss expectations," Caleb finally said, his voice clipped and professional. "To avoid any misunderstandings." Aisha set down her fork, her food barely touched. "Yes, I agree." She took a steadying breath. "I need 3 things, Mr. Whitmore: privacy, safety, and time." "Caleb." He corrected automatically, then frowned. "Safety from what?" Aisha's fingers tightened around her water glass, but she didn't answer. Instead, she continued, "I won't interfere with your life or your work. I understand this arrangement is unexpected for you. I just ask that you allow me my space and dignity." A door slammed somewhere in the house, probably caught by a draft, and Aisha flinched violently, her hand jerking and sending water sloshing over the rim of her glass. Caleb noticed how her eyes darted to the nearest exit, how her breathing quickened before she forced it back under control. Something shifted in his expression, a slight softening around his eyes, but his voice remained businesslike. "Your privacy will be respected. I've had the East Wing prepared. You'll have your own suite of rooms. We'll maintain separate bedrooms, of course. I have no intention of this becoming personal." Relief flickered across Aisha's face. "Thank you. I assume you'll want to give notice at your current position," Caleb added, an edge of bitterness creeping into his tone. "I can continue working if you prefer," Aisha said quietly. "Nothing needs to change." "Everything has already changed," Caleb replied sharply, then seemed to regret his harshness when Aisha tensed. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "No, that wouldn't be appropriate. The situation is complicated enough." The rest of dinner passed in silence. Afterward, Caleb showed Aisha to her rooms, maintaining a careful distance between them as they walked the long hallway. "The East Wing is yours," he said, stopping at an ornate door. "You'll find everything you need inside. If you require anything else, there's an intercom system." Aisha nodded, her hand resting lightly on the doorknob. "Good night, Mr. Caleb." Inside her new rooms, Aisha slowly took in the luxury around her, the silk drapes, the plush carpet, the elegant furniture. But instead of exploring, she sank to her knees beside the bed, clasping her hands tightly. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Not for comfort or ease, but for shelter, for a way forward, for protection, even if it comes in an unexpected form. Help me be strong enough for what lies ahead." Meanwhile, Caleb stood outside his study, his hand on the door but making no move to enter. The house felt different tonight, the familiar silence somehow more noticeable. He thought of Aisha's flinch at the slamming door, the careful way she held herself, the quiet dignity in her voice when she'd asked for safety. He was used to understanding things, to having control of situations. But this marriage of convenience that felt more like a collision of two separate desperations left him unsettled. There was a story here he didn't know, a strength he didn't understand. The thought nagged at him as he stood in the darkened hallway, as unfamiliar with his own reactions as he was with the woman who was now, legally, his wife. The morning light filtered through the grand windows of the Whitmore Estates kitchen, casting long shadows across marble countertops. Aisha moved through the space with practiced ease, her movements as natural as breathing. Years of working in kitchens had taught her hands where to reach, what to grasp, how to create order from emptiness. Steam rose from the coffee maker as she prepared a fresh pot, the aroma filling the kitchen. Her fingers worked quickly, laying out plates and measuring portions with the precision that came from experience rather than necessity. No one had asked her to do this. No one expected it. Yet here she was, falling into old patterns that felt safe, predictable. The sound of footsteps made her pause. Caleb appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his usual crisp suit. He hesitated for a moment, clearly not expecting to find her there. "Good morning," she said softly, sliding a cup of coffee toward him. Black, no sugar. She remembered from her days of cleaning his office. "You don't have to do this," he said, but accepted the cup anyway. You're not the staff anymore." "I know." Aisha kept her eyes on the eggs she was scrambling. "It helps me think, keeps my hands busy." Caleb settled at the kitchen island, opening his tablet to check the morning news. The television mounted on the wall played quietly in the background, some morning show discussing current events. When a heated debate broke out between the hosts, their voices rising sharply, Aisha's hand jerked. The spatula clattered against the pan. Caleb noticed. He saw how her shoulders tensed, how her eyes darted toward the door before she forced herself to relax. Without comment, he reached for the remote and lowered the volume. They ate in silence, an odd domestic scene that neither had anticipated. Aisha sat at the far end of the island, maintaining careful distance. Her movements were precise, controlled, like someone who had learned to make themselves smaller, less noticeable. Throughout the morning, Caleb found his attention drawn to details he'd overlooked before. The way she always positioned herself where she could see both exits, how she moved aside when someone passed, giving them wide berth, little things that spoke volumes in their silence. Around noon, Caleb was working in his home office when he heard it. Aisha's voice, firm but threaded with tension, coming from the hallway. "No, I've already told you not to call this number." Her words were measured, careful. "I don't want any contact, none." A pause, then more firmly. "Stop calling. I mean it." Caleb rose from his desk, moving closer to the partially open door. He could see Aisha's reflection in the hallway mirror, her free hand pressed against the wall as if seeking support. "The papers are filed. It's done. Don't—" Her voice caught. "Don't try to find me." The call ended, and Caleb watched as she took several deep breaths, her composure returning like a mask sliding back into place. He waited a few moments before stepping into the hallway, pretending he hadn't heard. "Aisha," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "I'm having the security system upgraded this week. Additional cameras, motion sensors. Standard procedure for all family residences." She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since their wedding. Something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or recognition. She didn't thank him, didn't explain. Just nodded once, her relief visible only in the slight loosening of her shoulders. Later that evening, Caleb stood in his study, watching the sunset paint the manicured grounds in shades of gold and shadow. The security company's proposal sat on his desk, already signed. Next to it lay a stack of reports he should be reviewing, numbers and projections that had always been the center of his world. But his thoughts kept drifting to breakfast, to that clatter of a spatula, to the way Aisha's hands shook when holding her coffee mug, to the phone call he wasn't supposed to hear, and the strength it must have taken to keep her voice steady. The man who had signed that marriage contract yesterday would have seen these things as complications, inconveniences in a purely business arrangement. That man would have maintained his distance, stuck to the terms they'd agreed upon. But standing there, now, watching darkness settle over his carefully ordered world, Caleb realized something had shifted. The contract still stood, the boundaries remained, but something else had taken root alongside them. A sense of responsibility that went beyond legal obligation, an awareness he couldn't simply file away. The quiet of the house settled around him, broken only by the distant sound of dishes being put away in the kitchen. Even now, Aisha moved through the space like a shadow, tidying things that didn't need tidying, keeping her hands busy, keeping herself safe in the familiar rhythm of work. Caleb turned away from the window, his reflection fading as the last light disappeared. The arrangement was exactly as they'd agreed, yet already it had changed him in ways he hadn't expected. Made him notice things he'd spent years overlooking. Made him question what it truly meant to provide shelter, to offer safety. The night pressed against the windows, and somewhere in this too large house, a woman who was legally his wife but practically a stranger continued her careful dance of survival. And Caleb, for the first time in years, found himself truly seeing the space between what was legal and what was right, between contract and covenant, between obligation and choice. The grandfather clock in Caleb's study chimed 10 o'clock, its deep resonance filling the quiet room. He sat at his mahogany desk, surrounded by stacks of legal documents that required his attention. The lamp cast a warm glow across the papers, but his eyes were growing tired from hours of review. A soft creak made him look up. The heavy wooden door had opened just enough for a small figure to slip through. Caleb blinked, his pen frozen mid-signature as he stared at the unexpected visitor. A little boy stood in the doorway, dressed in blue pajamas decorated with rockets and stars. His feet were bare on the hardwood floor, and he held a well-loved stuffed elephant by its trunk. Dark curls framed a face that regarded Caleb with remarkable intensity for someone so young. Malik Monroe took a cautious step forward, then another. His movements were deliberate, like someone approaching a wild animal they didn't want to startle. Caleb found himself holding perfectly still, as if any sudden motion might send the child running. "Hello?" Caleb said softly, setting down his pen. He wasn't sure what else to say. He'd never been good with children. Malik tilted his head slightly, studying Caleb with eyes that seemed far too knowing for his age. Then he padded closer to the desk, his elephant swinging gently with each step. "Mommy says you're my daddy now." The words hung in the air like suspended crystals. Caleb felt his chest tighten as their weight settled over him. His mind raced to process this simple statement that somehow changed everything. Caleb's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "She told you that?" Malik nodded solemnly. "She said you're keeping us safe." He hugged his elephant closer. "Are you?" Before Caleb could form a response, quick footsteps approached in the hallway. Aisha appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. Her eyes widened when she saw Malik standing by Caleb's desk. "Malik, what are you— I'm so sorry, Mr. Whitmore." Her voice wavered between stern mother and apologetic employee. "He's supposed to be in bed. I didn't realize he'd gotten up." "It's all right," Caleb heard himself say, though nothing felt all right at that moment. Everything he thought he understood about their arrangement was shifting beneath his feet. Malik turned to his mother. "I wanted to meet him proper," he explained, using the formal phrase with endearing seriousness. "Since he's our family now." Aisha's face flushed. "Sweetheart, Mr. Whitmore is very busy with work. We shouldn't disturb him." She held out her hand. "Come on, back to bed." But Caleb was already moving, pushing back his chair and coming around the desk. Without conscious thought, he found himself kneeling down to Malik's level. The boy didn't step back, just turned those solemn eyes on him again. "What's your elephant's name?" Caleb asked, his voice gentler than he'd ever heard it. "Thumper," Malik replied, "because his feet make noise when I walk." He demonstrated by making the stuffed animal dance, and its worn feet did indeed make a soft, thumping sound against the floor. "That's a good name," Caleb said. He glanced up at Aisha, who stood frozen in the doorway, her expression a mix of fear and hope that made his heart ache in unfamiliar ways. Malik stepped closer, close enough that Caleb could smell the baby shampoo in his hair. "Do you like stories?" the boy asked. "Mommy reads to me every night. Maybe—" He hesitated, then pushed on with quiet bravery. "Maybe you could listen too sometimes." Caleb felt something crack inside his chest, some wall he'd built long ago between himself and genuine connection. This child, this solemn little boy, with his stuffed elephant and his rocket pajamas, had just walked right through all his careful defenses. "I'd like that," Caleb said, surprised to find he meant it completely. "Really?" Malik's face lit up with the first real smile Caleb had seen from him. It transformed his whole face, making him look his age for the first time. "Really?" Caleb confirmed. He looked up at Aisha again, trying to convey without words that something fundamental had changed. This wasn't just about legal protection anymore. It wasn't about contracts or appearances or doing what was expected. "But not tonight," Aisha said firmly, though her voice was gentle. "It's way past bedtime, young man." Malik nodded, accepting this with the same gravity he seemed to approach everything. He turned back to Caleb. "Good night, sir," he said, clearly uncertain what to call this new authority figure in his life. "Good night, Malik," Caleb replied, standing up slowly. His knees protested the time spent on the hard floor, but he barely noticed. As Aisha led Malik from the room, Caleb remained standing there, staring at the empty doorway. The legal papers on his desk seemed suddenly insignificant compared to the weight of responsibility that had just settled onto his shoulders. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't expected to become anyone's father, especially not through such unusual circumstances. But Malik's words echoed in his mind. "Mommy says you're keeping us safe." It wasn't just a legal arrangement anymore. It wasn't just signatures on paper or separate bedrooms or polite distance. This was about a little boy who needed protection, who wanted to share bedtime stories, who looked at Caleb with those trusting eyes. This marriage had become something else entirely, something deeper and more sacred than any contract. It had become a calling. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Caleb's study, casting long shadows across the antique Persian rug. Aisha sat perched on the edge of a leather armchair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The room felt different in daylight, less intimidating than it had been during last night's unexpected encounter. Caleb waited, giving her space to find her words. He'd learned enough about her in these past days to know that pushing would only make this harder. Malik isn't... Aisha took a deep breath. He's not your biological son. I want to be clear about that. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. But he's never had a real father figure. His biological father was... She stopped, swallowed hard. He wasn't safe for us to be around. Understanding dawned in Caleb's eyes. The flinching at sudden movements, the careful monitoring of exits, the persistent wariness. It all made terrible sense now. You left to protect him, Caleb said quietly. Aisha nodded, blinking back tears. We got out when Malik was 4, changed our names, moved across the country. I thought we were finally safe, but then... Her hands trembled, slightly. He found us again. That's why I needed this marriage, the protection it offers. And Malik? Caleb asked gently. What does he understand about all this? He knows we're safe here, that you're... She hesitated. He sees you as someone strong who won't hurt us. Children pick up on more than we think. He watches how you move, how you speak. He's never seen a man who's gentle. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Caleb thought about his own childhood, about the cold precision of his father's expectations, about learning to equate strength with distance. He should stay here, Caleb said firmly. Both of you. Not just because of the legal protection, but because... He searched for the right words. Because every child deserves stability. Safety. Relief flooded Aisha's face, though she tried to hide it. We don't expect anything from you. Just having a secure place to live is more than... No, Caleb interrupted, surprising them both with his intensity. This isn't about expectations or obligations. This is about doing what's right. Later that morning, Caleb made several quiet phone calls from his home office. His personal attorney, trusted for his discretion, agreed to review additional protective measures. They discussed restraining orders, security protocols, and legal safeguards that could be put in place without drawing attention. While he worked, Malik began his cautious exploration of the house. Caleb could hear the soft padding of small feet in the hallway, pausing occasionally outside his office door. Around lunchtime, the boy finally gathered enough courage to peek inside. Would you like to come in? Caleb asked, keeping his voice casual. Malik nodded, clutching Thumper to his chest as he entered. He studied the room with obvious fascination, the tall bookshelves, the large desk, the wall of windows overlooking the garden. Do you read all these books? He asked, eyes wide. Some of them, Caleb admitted. Would you like to see my favorite? Malik's face lit up. He approached the desk carefully as Caleb pulled out an old volume of illustrated adventures. They spent the next hour looking through it together, Malik asking thoughtful questions about the pictures while Caleb explained the stories. As afternoon faded into evening, they moved to the living room. Aisha brought them sandwiches, her expression soft as she watched Malik gradually relax in Caleb's presence. The boy's questions became more frequent, his smile appearing more easily. The day's activities eventually caught up with Malik. As Caleb read from another book they'd discovered, the child's eyes grew heavy. Without fanfare or fuss, Malik simply leaned against Caleb's arm, Thumper tucked securely under his chin. Within minutes, he was asleep. Caleb sat very still, acutely aware of the small, warm weight against his side. He looked down at Malik's peaceful face, marveling at the simple trust displayed in this unconscious gesture. This child, who had learned so early to be wary, felt safe enough to fall asleep beside him. Aisha stood in the doorway, watching them. Their eyes met over Malik's sleeping form, and something unspoken passed between them. An acknowledgement that things had shifted, that the careful boundaries they'd established were changing into something else entirely. This moment of trust, as simple as it appeared, held the weight of mountains. It wasn't just about a sleeping child or a shared story. It was about healing, about redefining family, about choosing to be better than the patterns that had shaped them. Caleb adjusted his arm slightly, making sure Malik was comfortable. The boy sighed in his sleep, but didn't wake, completely at peace in his new protector's presence. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, casting a warm glow across the marble countertops. Aisha moved with practiced ease, the familiar rhythm of preparing breakfast bringing a sense of normalcy to her new reality. The sound of footsteps made her pause, but she relaxed when she recognized Caleb's measured stride. "Good morning," he said quietly, settling into what had become his usual spot at the breakfast bar. This routine had developed naturally over the past few days, him arriving just as she finished cooking, Malik trailing behind him with sleepy eyes and tousled hair. "Morning," Aisha replied, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of him. "Malik, honey, your milk is getting warm." The little boy climbed onto his chair, his Superman pajamas slightly twisted from sleep. "Mr. Caleb, do I really get to go to school soon?" Caleb set down his coffee cup carefully. "Yes, we have an appointment to tour Carlton Elementary tomorrow morning. It's a good school with excellent security measures." He glanced at Aisha, making sure she caught the significance of his last words. She nodded, grateful for his attention to detail. The past few days had brought subtle but meaningful changes to their lives. Caleb had transformed from a distant figure to a steady presence, his initial coldness melting into something resembling care. "Will there be other kids there?" Malik asked, pushing his eggs around his plate. "Lots of them," Caleb assured him, "and a playground with new equipment." Aisha watched as her son's face lit up. It had been so long since he'd had regular playmates. Their previous life had required too much secrecy, too much moving around. Later that afternoon, Caleb called them both to the front door, where a security technician was finishing up some installations. "I want to show you how everything works," he explained, directing his words primarily to Aisha. "Each window and door has a sensor now. You'll both have personal codes for the system." Aisha felt her throat tighten with emotion as he walked them through each feature. Cameras, motion sensors, panic buttons discreetly placed throughout the house. He wasn't just installing security. He was giving her control, explaining every detail so she could feel safe in her own knowledge. "The codes are 8 digits," he demonstrated on the keypad. "Malik, would you like to pick your own numbers?" The boy's eyes widened with importance. "Can I use my birthday?" "How about we make it a little more creative?" Aisha suggested gently, her protective instincts kicking in. Caleb nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking. Let's choose something only Malik would know but isn't personal information." As evening approached, they found themselves settling into the family room. Malik had his coloring books spread across the coffee table, while Caleb reviewed documents on his tablet. Aisha sat nearby with a cup of tea, allowing herself to relax into the soft cushions of the armchair, something that would have been impossible just days ago. "Mr. Caleb?" Malik looked up from his drawing. "Do you pray like Mommy does?" The question hung in the air, innocent but weighty. Caleb set his tablet aside, giving the child his full attention. "I haven't in a long time," he admitted honestly. "Can we pray together?" Malik asked, already standing up. "Mommy says it's good to thank God for good things." Aisha watched, breath held, as Caleb's expression softened. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Malik." They gathered in a small circle, Malik's small hand reaching for both adults. Aisha felt Caleb's slight hesitation before his fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. The touch was gentle, respectful of boundaries while acknowledging connection. "Dear God," Malik began, his voice clear and trusting. "Thank you for our new home and for Mr. Caleb. Thank you for keeping Mommy safe and for my new school. And thank you for the pancakes this morning." Aisha felt tears prick at her corners of her eyes, but these were different from the fearful ones she'd grown used to. These spoke of hope, of possibility, of healing. "Amen," Caleb whispered, his voice rough with emotion. They remained in the circle for a moment longer, connected by something more than necessity or legal documents. It wasn't quite family yet, but it was a beginning, fragile as a butterfly's wing, but just as beautiful. As they prepared to head upstairs for bedtime, Aisha caught Caleb's eye. No words were needed. Her grateful nod said everything. He returned it with understanding, both of them acknowledging the small miracle of trust being built between them. This evening prayer, suggested by a child's pure heart, had somehow created more than just a ritual. It had carved out a space for healing, for growth, for the possibility of becoming something none of them had dared to hope for. A real family, bound not by fear or obligation, but by choice and care. The afternoon sun streamed through the study windows, casting warm patches of light across the polished desk where Malik sat beside Caleb, his small legs swinging as he concentrated on his math workbook. Caleb leaned in, pointing to a problem with his pen. "So if you have 8 cookies, and you want to share them equally with 4 friends, how many cookies does each friend get?" Malik's forehead wrinkled in concentration. 2 cookies each? His voice lifted hopefully at the end. "That's exactly right." Caleb smiled, watching the boy's face light up at the praise. "You're very good at division. Mommy taught me with real cookies once." Malik shared. Then his voice dropped lower. "When we lived at Miss Sarah's house, we had to be really quiet there." Caleb's hand stilled on the paper. He kept his voice gentle, matching Malik's hushed tone. "Did you move around a lot?" Malik nodded, fidgeting with his pencil. "We had different houses. Sometimes we stayed in the car." He glanced quickly at the door, a habit Caleb had noticed before. "Mommy said we had to be careful, like playing hide-and-seek, but for real." Something tightened in Caleb's chest. He'd suspected as much, but hearing it from a child's perspective made it painfully real. "That must have been scary sometimes." "Yeah." Malik's pencil moved in nervous circles on his paper. "But Mommy always made it okay. She told me stories and gave me special jobs, like being quiet as a mouse." He demonstrated by tiptoeing his fingers across the desk. "I'm really good at being quiet." "You are." Caleb agreed softly, noting how even now Malik's voice barely rose above a whisper. "But you know what? In this house, you don't have to be quiet unless you want to be. You can laugh and play and just be yourself." Malik looked up at him with those solemn, dark eyes that seemed too old for his young face. "Really? Even when I'm doing homework?" "Even then." Caleb ruffled the boy's hair gently. "Speaking of which, should we try another math problem?" A small movement caught his attention, and Caleb glanced up to see Aisha standing in the doorway. How long she'd been there, he wasn't sure, but the look on her face, a mixture of gratitude and pain, made his heart clench. Later that evening, after Malik was tucked into bed, Aisha found Caleb in the study again. The room had become a sort of neutral ground for them, a place where guards could lower slightly and truth could emerge in careful measures. "Thank you," she said quietly, standing near his desk, "for being so patient with him today." Caleb set aside the file he'd been reviewing. "He's a remarkable kid, very bright." "He is." Aisha's hands twisted together, a nervous gesture he'd come to recognize. She took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. I need to tell you something about why we're here." He gestured to the leather armchair across from him, and she sat, perched on the edge like someone ready to flee at a moment's notice. The table lamp cast soft shadows across her face as she began to speak. "His name is Jonah Price," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My first husband. I met him at church, if you can believe it. He seemed so perfect at first. Charming, devoted to his faith, always saying the right things." Caleb remained silent, giving her space to continue. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice remained steady. "The control started small, checking my phone, questioning where I'd been, getting angry if I spent time with friends." She swallowed hard. "Then came the pushing, the hitting. He'd always apologize after, say it would never happen again. I believed him for too long." Anger burned in Caleb's chest, but he kept his expression neutral, knowing any display of emotion might make her stop. "When did you decide to leave?" "When I found out I was pregnant with Malik." Her eyes filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. "I could handle what he did to me, but I wouldn't, let my child grow up in that fear. So I planned, saved what money I could, found people who helped women like me disappear." She took another shaky breath. "We've been running for 6 years, different names, different cities. I thought we were safe, but he never stopped looking. That's why this marriage—" She gestured between them. "It's not just about protection. It's about becoming someone else completely. Someone he can't find." Caleb leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "He won't find you. Either of you. I promise you that." "You don't know him," Aisha whispered. "He has connections, resources. He's charming enough to make people believe anything. And I have more." The words came out with quiet certainty. "More resources, more connections, and absolutely no charm to waste on someone like him." He met her eyes steadily. "I meant what I said. No one will ever hurt you or Malik again, not while I'm alive." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. It wasn't just a promise of protection anymore. It was a vow, spoken with the same weight as their marriage ceremony, but this time with full understanding and purpose. Aisha didn't respond verbally, but her shoulders relaxed, slightly, and for the first time since he'd known her, she leaned back in her chair instead of perching ready to run. Outside, the night had deepened, and the study's warm lamplight created a cocoon of safety around them. In the quiet, something shifted. Trust, perhaps, or hope, taking root in soil that had long been too harsh for either to grow. The living room glowed softly in the evening light, the TV's blue flicker dancing across their faces. Caleb had suggested a movie night after noticing Malik's fascination with the large screen in his study. They settled on an animated film about talking animals, safe, light, and perfect for a 6-year-old. "Can we have popcorn?" Malik asked, his eyes bright with hope. He sat cross-legged on the floor, hugging a pillow to his chest. "Of course," Caleb replied, heading to the kitchen. He could hear Aisha settling onto the couch, her movements still careful but less tense than before. The microwave hummed as he watched the bag expand, and he found himself smiling at the ordinary moment. When he returned with a large bowl, Malik's face lit up. "Thank you." The boy reached for a handful, then paused, looking at his mother for permission, a habit born from years of uncertainty. Aisha nodded, her smile gentle. "Go ahead, sweetheart." The movie began, and soon the room filled with the sound of crunching popcorn and the silly antics of animated characters. Caleb watched Malik more than the screen, noticing how the boy slowly relaxed, his shoulders dropping, his grip on the pillow loosening. Then it happened. A perfectly timed joke, a ridiculous pratfall on screen, and Malik burst out laughing. Not the quiet chuckle they'd heard before, but a full, bright sound of pure joy. The kind of laugh that only children can make. Free and unguarded. The sound startled them all for a moment. Malik looked back at his mother, perhaps expecting the old warnings to be quiet, to not draw attention. But instead, Aisha's face crinkled with delight, and she began laughing too. Her laugh was softer, but just as real, like music that had been locked away for too long. Caleb felt something shift in his chest. The sound of their combined laughter filled the room, warming it more than any expensive heating system ever could. He'd sat in boardrooms, closed million-dollar deals, earned accolades and respect, but none of it had ever made him feel like this. This was home. He found himself chuckling along, and Malik turned to him with eyes shining. "Did you see that part?" the boy asked excitedly, pointing at the screen. "The penguin did a flip." "I saw it," Caleb answered, his voice soft with affection. "Pretty impressive flip, wasn't it?" Malik nodded enthusiastically, stuffing more popcorn in his mouth. Aisha reached down to brush some kernels from his shirt, her touch natural and loving. For a moment, they were just a family enjoying a movie together, no shadows lurking at the edges of their peace. The evening continued, wrapped in this comfortable warmth. When Malik's eyes started drooping, Aisha gently suggested bedtime. Usually the boy would protest, but tonight he just nodded sleepily. "Can we do this again?" he asked, looking between Caleb and his mother. "Anytime you want," Caleb promised, meaning every word. After Aisha took Malik upstairs, Caleb stayed in the living room, letting the feeling of contentment settle around him. His massive house had never felt like home before. It had been a symbol of success, a fortress of solitude. But never this. Never warm. The next morning arrived crisp and clear, sunlight streaming through the windows as Caleb reviewed his mail in his study. The usual stack of business correspondence held no surprises until he reached a plain white envelope marked "Confidential." Inside, he found a typed report from the private investigator he'd hired to monitor any potential threats. His eyes scanned the words, and the warmth from last night drained away, replaced by a cold, heavy weight in his stomach. Subject: Jonah Price. Status: active search initiated. Target: Sarah Price, former name of Aisha Monroe. Location: multiple inquiries made within 50-mile radius. Subject displaying systematic search patterns consistent with previous tracking behaviors. Caleb's hands tightened on the paper, careful not to crumple it despite the anger rising in his chest. The threat they'd been preparing for was no longer theoretical. Jonah Price wasn't just a shadow from the past. He was actively hunting for them, methodically working his way closer. He could hear Aisha and Malik in the kitchen below, the quiet sounds of breakfast preparation floating up through the house. The same house that had felt so safe last night now seemed vulnerable, its walls suddenly too thin, its windows too exposed. Caleb stood, walking to the window. Security cameras swept the perimeter, guards patrolled the grounds, and the best alarm system money could buy protected every entrance. But would it be enough? Not against someone who knew Aisha's patterns, who had spent years learning how to control and manipulate her. With precise movements, Caleb folded the letter, creasing each edge with deliberate care. The time for passive protection was over. They couldn't just hide behind walls and hope Jonah would give up. This would require direct action, confrontation. The thought settled in his mind with cold clarity. He would have to meet this threat head-on. The letter slid into his desk drawer, but its weight remained in his thoughts. Last night's laughter echoed in his memory, making his resolve even stronger. He had promised them safety, and he would deliver it, not just by building walls, but by eliminating the threat entirely. The morning light streamed through the study windows as Caleb reviewed another stack of legal documents. His coffee had long gone cold, forgotten amid the mounting paperwork that seemed to multiply with each passing hour. The clock on his desk showed 9:15 in the morning, but his day had started before dawn. "Mr. Whitmore." His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The lawyers are here for the emergency meeting." Caleb pressed the button to respond. "Send them in." He gathered the scattered papers, trying to organize the chaos that had erupted since Jonah Price's legal team had filed their motion. 3 attorneys entered, their faces grim. Sarah Chen, his lead counsel, spoke first. "He's pushing hard for emergency custody hearings, claims he was denied his parental rights and that Aisha kidnapped Malik." Caleb's jaw tightened. He's the one who drove them away with his abuse. "The problem is proving it," Thomas, another lawyer, added. "Most of the incidents went unreported. No hospital records, no police reports." "Because she was terrified," Caleb said, his voice sharp with frustration. "You don't understand what it's like for her. She still flinches at loud noises." Down the hall, Aisha sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. Her phone displayed another message from her old neighbor in Tennessee, warning her that Jonah had been asking questions there, too. The sound of small feet padding across the floor made her look up. Malik stood in the doorway, his school backpack clutched to his chest like a shield. "Mommy, are we having to leave again?" Aisha's heart cracked at the fear in his voice. "Come here, baby." She opened her arms, and he ran to her, climbing onto her lap despite being almost too big for it now. "I heard talking," he whispered, "about the bad man finding us." She stroked his hair, fighting back tears. "We're safe right now. Mr. Caleb is helping us." "But what if he can't?" The question hung in the air, heavy with all the weight of their past escapes, all the midnight runs and temporary shelters. Back in the study, Caleb leaned forward in his chair. "I don't care what it costs. Find everything. You can on Jonah Price. Every parking ticket, every complaint, every business dealing. There has to be a pattern we can prove." Sarah nodded, making notes. "We've already uncovered some concerning financial irregularities at his company, and there are 2 ex-girlfriends before Aisha who might be willing to testify about his behavior." "Good, but keep it quiet. I don't want this splashed across the media. Aisha and Malik have been through enough." The day dragged on, filled with hushed phone calls and urgent meetings. Caleb's company board was getting nervous about the potential scandal, sending thinly veiled warnings about protecting shareholder interests. By evening, Aisha could feel the walls closing in. She stood at the kitchen window, watching Malik play in the backyard with the security guard Caleb had hired. The boy seemed happy, almost normal, but she knew how quickly peace could shatter. Her phone buzzed again, another message from her old life. Someone else who'd seen Jonah, asking questions, showing old pictures, playing the part of the concerned father searching for his missing child. She deleted the message, but couldn't delete the fear. Later that night, after Malik was asleep, Aisha overheard Caleb on the phone in his study. "I don't care about the company's image right now," he was saying, his voice tight with anger. "This is about protecting my family." Family. The word echoed in her mind as she climbed the stairs to her room. That's what they'd become, somehow, in these few weeks together. A real family, not just a legal arrangement. And that's exactly why she couldn't stay. She waited until the house was quiet. Midnight came and went. At 1:30 in the morning, she pulled a small bag from under her bed. The emergency bag she'd never fully unpacked. Old habits dying hard. Her hands shook as she added a few more items. A photo of Malik from his new school. The small cross necklace Caleb had given her last week, saying it had belonged to his grandmother. "Mommy." She froze at Malik's voice, so small in the darkness. "Are you leaving?" He stood in the doorway, clutching his stuffed bear. "Please don't leave. I like it here. Mr. Caleb reads me stories and doesn't yell." "Oh, baby." She sank to her knees, opening her arms to him. He came running, tears already falling. "I'm just trying to keep everyone safe." "But Mr. Caleb said we're safe here. He promised." She held him tighter, remembering Caleb's face when he'd made that promise, the steel in his voice when he'd said no one would hurt them again. But she'd seen the legal papers on his desk, the mounting costs of fighting Jonah's claims. She'd heard the whispers among the household staff about the company's stock prices dropping as rumors spread. Sometimes, she tried to explain, being brave means knowing when to stand and fight. Caleb's voice came from the hallway. He stepped into view, still in his work clothes, his tie loosened. "Not when to run." Aisha stood slowly, Malik still clinging to her. "I can't let you destroy everything you've built. Your company, your reputation. Those things mean nothing compared to what's at stake here." He moved closer, his eyes intense in the dim light. "Do you know what I see when I look at my life before you and Malik? Empty success, hollow achievements. This is what matters." "Jonah won't stop," she whispered. "He'll keep coming until he destroys everything." "Then let him try." Caleb's voice was quiet but firm. "But we face it together. That's what families do." Malik looked up at them both, his small face serious. "Can we pray, like we do at bedtime?" Aisha felt tears spill over as Caleb knelt beside them, one hand reaching for hers, the other resting gently on Malik's shoulder. The emergency bag sat forgotten by the bed as they formed a small circle in the darkness, their whispered prayers mixing with tears and promises to face whatever came, together. But later, after Malik was back, in bed and Caleb had returned to his study, Aisha sat alone in her room. She looked at the bag, still waiting by the bed, thinking of all the times before when running had been the only way to survive. Her hand reached for it slowly, decision weighing heavy in her heart. The pre-dawn darkness filled the Whitmore estate with heavy shadows. Caleb couldn't sleep, his mind racing with legal strategies and protective measures. He walked the quiet hallways, his footsteps muffled by thick carpet, when a soft sound caught his attention. The door to Aisha's room was slightly ajar. His heart stopped when he saw the small duffel bag on her bed. Clothes were neatly folded beside it, along with Malik's favorite stuffed bear. Aisha stood at the dresser, her hands trembling as she gathered documents. "You don't have to do this," Caleb said softly, making her jump. She turned, eyes wide with fear and guilt. "I can't let him hurt anyone else. Your company, your reputation." "Stop." Caleb's voice was firm but gentle. He stepped into the room, closing the distance between them. "Running isn't protection. It's survival, yes, but you deserve more than just surviving." Tears filled Aisha's eyes. "You don't understand. Jonah will destroy everything to get to us. He always does." "Then let him try." Caleb's jaw set with determination. "But he'll have to go through me first, through lawyers, through security, through every protection I can provide." "Why?" Aisha whispered. "Why would you risk everything for us?" Before Caleb could answer, small footsteps padded down the hall. Malik appeared in the doorway, clutching his blanket. His eyes went straight to the packed bag, and his lower lip trembled. "Are we leaving again?" His voice was so small, so hurt, that it pierced the room like an arrow. Aisha reached for him automatically, but Malik backed away, shaking his head. "I don't want to hide anymore. I like it here. I like my new room and my new school and—" His eyes went to Caleb. "I like having a daddy." Caleb knelt down, getting eye level with the boy. "Listen to me, Malik. Both of you." He looked up at Aisha. "Family doesn't run from fights. Family stands together. But what if he finds us? Malik whispered. Then we face him together. Caleb opened his arms, and Malik ran into them. I promise you, right here and now, that I will never abandon you. Either of you. Aisha's hands covered her mouth, tears streaming freely now. Caleb reached out with one arm, inviting her into their embrace. She hesitated only a moment before joining them, and they held each other in the soft darkness of early morning. I'm scared, she admitted against Caleb's shoulder. I know, he said. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means doing what's right even when you are scared. Malik's small voice piped up. Like superheroes? A smile tugged at Caleb's mouth. Exactly like superheroes. And you know what? Real superheroes work as a team. The first hints of dawn began, to lighten the sky outside. Aisha pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes. I should start breakfast. We'll all help, Caleb said, standing up with Malik still in his arms. That's what families do. In the kitchen, they moved around each other with growing comfort. Malik measured coffee grounds while Aisha taught him to count scoops. Caleb scrambled eggs, following Aisha's patient instructions on adding just the right amount of milk to make them fluffy. The simple act of preparing food together seemed to settle something in all of them. Even with uncertainty hanging over their heads, there was strength in their unity. What happens next? Aisha asked as they sat down to eat. Caleb spread jam on his toast with careful attention. We meet with the lawyers this afternoon. They've gathered extensive documentation of Jonah's history of abuse. We have police reports, medical records, witness statements. Aisha's hand shook as she lifted her coffee cup. He'll deny everything. He always does. But this time you're not alone. Caleb reminded her. You have resources now, protection, and most importantly, you have truth on your side. Malik munched his toast, looking between the adults. Will I have to see him? No, sweetheart, Aisha said quickly. Never again if I can help it. The lawyers will make sure of that. Caleb added. Your safety comes first, both of you. They finished breakfast in thoughtful silence. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows now, warming the room. Aisha began clearing plates, but Caleb stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. Leave them, he said. We need to prepare for the meeting. Together. Malik slid off his chair. Can I help? You can help by being exactly who you are, Caleb told him. A brave, smart boy who deserves to feel safe in his own home. Aisha watched them, her heart full of fear and hope in equal measure. The packed bag still sat upstairs, but it seemed less like an escape route now and more like a reminder of what they were fighting to prevent. I'll call Martha to watch Malik during the meeting, Caleb said, referring to their trusted housekeeper. Actually, Aisha said slowly, I'd like to ask Ms. Chen from next door. Malik feels comfortable with her, and she's not connected to the household staff. Caleb nodded, understanding her need for careful boundaries. Whatever makes you feel secure. They moved through the morning with purpose, gathering documents and preparing for the afternoon ahead. Malik stayed close to both of them, as if afraid they might disappear if he looked away too long. As they got ready to leave for the lawyer's office, Aisha paused in the foyer. Thank you, she said softly to Caleb, for showing us what it means to stand instead of run. Caleb straightened his tie, his expression serious. Thank you for trusting me enough to stay. Malik hugged both their legs. We're a team now, right? Right, Caleb agreed, resting one hand on Malik's head and the other on Aisha's shoulder. And teams face challenges together. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Aisha clutched her worn leather purse, her knuckles white with tension. Caleb walked beside her, his presence steady and protective. His usual business suit was replaced with a more subdued grey ensemble, chosen to reflect sincerity rather than power. "Just breathe," he whispered, noticing how she held her breath. "We're ready for this." Inside the courtroom, polished wooden benches stretched in solemn rows. The air felt heavy with anticipation. Aisha's heart pounded as she spotted Jonah sitting at the opposite table, his familiar smirk making her stomach twist. He wore an expensive suit and a carefully crafted expression of concern. Their attorney, Sarah Chen, arranged files on their table with quiet efficiency. "Remember," she murmured, "just tell the truth. That's all we need." The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise. The Honorable Judge Martinez presiding." The first day focused on establishing facts. Medical records were presented, photographs of bruises Aisha had documented in secret, hospital visits explained away with practiced lies about falling downstairs or running into doors. The evidence felt like stones in Aisha's throat. "Mrs. Monroe," Sarah began gently, "can you tell us about the night of June 15th, 2 years ago?" Aisha's hands trembled in her lap. She closed her eyes briefly, drawing strength from Caleb's unwavering presence behind her. "Malik had a fever," she began softly. "I needed to take him to the emergency room, but Jonah—" Her voice caught. "He said I was being dramatic, that I just wanted attention. When I tried to leave anyway, he grabbed my arm and—" The bruises had lasted for weeks. The fear had lasted much longer. During cross-examination, Jonah's lawyer tried to paint her as unstable, manipulative. "Isn't it true you disappeared without warning? Took a child away from his father?" Objection. "Argumentative," Sarah called out. "Sustained," Judge Martinez replied firmly. The second day brought character witnesses. Aisha's former neighbor testified about the shouting she'd heard through the walls, the times she'd seen Aisha wearing long sleeves in summer heat. A nurse from the emergency room spoke about repeated visits and her growing concerns about domestic violence. Caleb's testimony came on the third day. He stood tall in the witness box, his voice clear and determined. "Mr. Whitmore, you're the CEO of a major corporation. Why involve yourself in this situation?" "Because some things matter more than business," Caleb replied. "I've seen how Malik thrives in a safe environment. I've witnessed Aisha's strength and dedication as a mother. They're not just a legal obligation to me, they're family." Jonah's facade began cracking under pressure. When confronted with documented evidence of his violence, his charming smile slipped into flashes of anger. He snapped at his own lawyer, revealing glimpses of the rage that Aisha knew all too well. During his testimony, Jonah tried to maintain control. "I've always provided for my family," he insisted smoothly. "Aisha was emotional, difficult to please. I only ever tried to help her." But the prosecutor was relentless. "Can you explain these police reports, Mr. Price? 3 separate domestic disturbance calls?" "Misunderstandings," Jonah said tightly. His jaw clenched, a familiar warning sign that made Aisha instinctively tense. "And this restraining order filed by your previous girlfriend in 2018. Jonah's composure cracked further. "She was lying. They're all lying." The outburst hung in the air, heavy with revelation. By the 4th day, even the court reporter looked drained. Malik's teachers testified about his transformation, from a withdrawn, anxious child to one who smiled and participated in class. His therapist spoke about signs of trauma and the importance of stability. During breaks, Caleb Maid. Sure, Aisha ate something, bringing her water and quietly shielding her from Jonah's attempts to make eye contact. They sat together on wooden benches outside the courtroom, sometimes in silence, sometimes whispering prayers. "You're doing so well," Caleb told her softly. "I know this is hard, But you're not alone anymore. The final day of testimony felt endless. Expert witnesses discussed patterns of abuse, the impact on children, the statistical likelihood of escalating violence. Aisha forced herself to breathe steadily as photographs of her old injuries were displayed on a screen. Jonah's mask slipped completely during final questioning. When pressed about specific incidents, he pounded the witness stand. "She was mine! She had no right to leave!" The words echoed through the courtroom, raw with possessive fury. Judge Martinez's expression hardened as she watched him. "The court will recess until tomorrow morning," she announced, her gavel crack making Aisha jump. "We'll reconvene at 9 a.m. for my ruling." As the courtroom slowly emptied, Aisha remained seated, her legs too shaky to stand. Caleb touched her shoulder gently. "Let's go home," he said softly. "Malik is waiting for us." Aisha nodded, gathering her courage once more. They walked out together, past Jonah's glare, past the whispers and stares. In the parking lot, Caleb opened her car door, then paused. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said firmly, "we face it as a family." I meant every word I said in there. Aisha felt tears well up. Not from fear this time, but from gratitude. The truth had been spoken. The shadows had been exposed to light. Now they could only wait and pray and hold on to their hard-won hope. The drive home from the courthouse felt endless. Aisha gazed out the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Caleb sat beside her, his shoulders tense but his presence steady. Malik dozed in the back seat, worn out from days spent with a kind, court-appointed guardian during the proceedings. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the estate's driveway as their car pulled up. None of them spoke as they made their way inside, each lost in their own thoughts about what the judge's decision might mean for their future. "I'm hungry," Malik announced, breaking the heavy silence. His simple statement brought them back to the present moment. Aisha managed a small smile. "How about some mac and cheese, sweetheart?" "Yes, please." Malik's face brightened. He followed her to the kitchen, with Caleb close behind. While Aisha prepared the comfort food, Malik sat at the counter, swinging his legs and watching them both with thoughtful eyes. "Can I ask something?" he said suddenly. "Of course," Caleb replied, pulling up a stool next to him. "My friend Tommy at school got adopted. He said his new parents chose him." Malik fidgeted with his sleeve. "Can families choose each other, even if they're not born together?" Aisha's hand stilled over the pot she was stirring. Caleb leaned forward, giving Malik his full attention. "Yes, they absolutely can," Caleb said firmly. "Sometimes the families God gives us aren't the ones we're born into. Sometimes He brings people together in different ways." "Like us?" Malik's voice was small but hopeful. Caleb reached out and gently squeezed the boy's shoulder. "Exactly like us." Aisha wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, touched by the exchange. She brought over 3 bowls of steaming mac and cheese, and they ate together at the kitchen counter. "You know," Caleb continued, looking at both Malik and Aisha, "love isn't just about blood relations. It's about choosing to care for someone every single day. It's about protecting them, supporting them, and being there no matter what." "Even when it's hard?" Malik asked between bites. "Especially when it's hard," Caleb answered. "That's when it matters most." After dinner, Malik went to play with his toys in the living room while Aisha cleaned up. Caleb helped dry the dishes, and for a while they worked in comfortable silence. "Did you mean what you said?" Aisha finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "About choosing to care every day?" Caleb set down the dish towel and turned to face her. "Aisha, when we first married, I saw it as a business arrangement, a contract. But now—" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Now I understand it's so much more than that. This isn't about obligation anymore, it's about covenant." Aisha's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the counter. "What do you mean?" "A contract is about protecting interests. A covenant is about protecting hearts." Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. "Every morning, I choose this family. I choose you and Malik. Not because of papers we signed, but because you've both shown me what real strength looks like, what faith looks like in action." Tears welled in Aisha's eyes. "I've been afraid to believe this could last," she admitted, "that we could really have peace." "I know," Caleb said softly, "but you don't have to carry that fear alone anymore." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand. "Whatever the judge decides, we face it together." From the living room, they could hear Malik humming to himself as he played. The sound of his contentment, his trust in their protection, filled the kitchen. "I've been praying," Aisha said, "not just for safety anymore, but for wisdom to accept happiness when it comes, to trust that God's plan might include joy, not just survival." Caleb squeezed her hand. "I think he's already showing us that plan." They joined Malik in the living room, where he had set up an elaborate racetrack for his toy cars. Caleb sat on the floor beside him, genuinely interested in the boy's detailed explanation of each vehicle's special features. Aisha settled into the armchair, watching them with growing peace in her heart. The evening light softened into dusk. Malik's excitement gradually gave way to yawns, and soon he was curled up against Caleb's side, half asleep. "Time for bed, sweetheart," Aisha said softly. As she helped Malik up, he hugged them both. "Are we a forever family now?" he asked sleepily. "Yes," Caleb answered without hesitation. "We're a forever family." After tucking Malik in, Aisha returned to find Caleb standing by the window, looking out at the darkened garden. The quiet of the house wrapped around them like a warm blanket. "I never thought I'd find peace again," Aisha said, standing beside him. "But here, with you and Malik, I'm starting to believe it's possible." Caleb turned to her, his expression open and sincere. "It's more than possible. It's already happening. Whatever the judge decides—" A sharp knock at the front door cut through the moment. They both froze, knowing what it must mean. The courier they'd been told to expect. The judge's decision. The gentle chime of the doorbell echoed through the Whitmore estate, causing Aisha's breath to catch in her throat. Her hands, which had been absently folding a dish towel, began to tremble. Caleb met her eyes across the kitchen, his expression steady and reassuring. "I'll get it," he said softly, touching her shoulder as he passed. Malik pressed closer to his mother's side, his small fingers gripping the hem of her sweater. Their lawyer, Mrs. Chen, stood in the doorway with an envelope in her hands and a warm smile that made Aisha's heart leap with hope. "The judge has made his ruling," she announced, stepping inside. "I thought you'd want to hear this in person." They gathered in the living room, where afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows. Caleb sat beside Aisha on the couch, while Malik nestled between them. Mrs. Chen took the armchair across from them, her movements deliberate as she opened the envelope. "The court has ruled in your favor," she began, her voice clear and confident. "Jonah Price's parental rights have been terminated, effective immediately. Additionally, the judge has granted a permanent restraining order. He cannot come within 500 feet of any of you, your home, or Malik's school." The words hung in the air for a moment before their full meaning sank in. Aisha's hands flew to her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. 6 years of running, hiding and living in fear crashed down around her like fallen walls. She felt Caleb's steady hand on her back, anchoring her as emotions overwhelmed her. "We're safe?" she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "He can't take Malik." Mrs. Chen nodded firmly. "You're safe. The evidence was overwhelming, and your testimony was compelling. The judge was particularly moved by the documented pattern of abuse and the obvious bond that's formed between Malik and Mr. Whitmore." Malik looked up at his mother, his dark eyes wide with understanding beyond his years. "Does this mean we don't have to be scared anymore, Mummy?" Aisha pulled her son close, pressing, her face into his curly hair as tears flowed freely. "That's right, baby. We don't have to be scared anymore." Caleb's voice was thick with emotion when he spoke. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen, for everything." The lawyer smiled, gathering her papers. "There's one more thing. The judge made a point of mentioning that should you wish to pursue legal adoption, Mr. Whitmore, the court would look favorably upon such a petition, given the obvious care and stability you've provided." After Mrs. Chen left, they sat in the living room, letting the news settle around them like a warm blanket. The fear that had been their constant companion for so long began to dissolve, replaced by something new and fragile. Peace. "I think," Aisha said softly, wiping her eyes. "This calls for a celebration. A quiet one, just us." Caleb nodded, understanding as always. "Whatever you want. This is your victory." "Our victory," she corrected gently. "We wouldn't be here without you, Caleb." They moved to the kitchen, together, falling into an easy rhythm they'd developed over the past weeks. Aisha began pulling ingredients from the cupboards while Caleb helped Malik wash his hands at the sink. The simple act of preparing dinner together felt different now. No shadow lurking at the edges. No need to watch the doors. Malik stood on his step stool at the counter, carefully helping Aisha roll out dough for his favorite cinnamon rolls. Flour dusted his nose, and his giggles filled the kitchen, a sound that once would have been quickly hushed for fear of drawing attention. "Can I tell you a secret?" Malik whispered loudly to Caleb as they worked. "I prayed really hard for this. Every night." Caleb's expression softened as he looked at the boy. "Me too, buddy. Every single night." When the food was ready, they gathered around the dining room table. Steam rose from a pot of Aisha's homemade chicken soup, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. Before eating, they joined hands naturally, bowing, their heads in prayer. "Dear God," Aisha began, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you for your protection and guidance. Thank you for bringing us to safety, for giving us shelter in this home, and—" She paused, squeezing Caleb's hand. "For bringing us to this family. Thank you for Mummy being happy," Malik added earnestly. "And for Caleb keeping us safe." They ate together, sharing soft conversation and occasional laughter. The tension that had been their constant companion had lifted, leaving room for joy to take root. As Aisha watched Caleb help Malik blow on his soup to cool it, she felt tears prick her eyes again. But these were different tears, born of gratitude rather than fear. After dinner, as the sky outside turned purple with sunset, they settled in the living room. Malik curled up on the couch between them, his head resting against Caleb's arm as they read a story together. The peaceful moment stretched out, wrapping around them like a protective embrace. When the story was finished, Caleb set the book aside and turned to face Malik with gentle seriousness. "Hey, buddy, can I ask you something important?" Malik sat up straighter, sensing the significance of the moment. "Yes. You know how much I care about you and your mom, right?" Caleb began, his voice soft but steady. "How I want to always be here to protect you both." Malik nodded solemnly. "Well," Caleb continued, glancing briefly at Aisha, who watched with tears shining in her eyes, "I was wondering how you would feel if I became your father. Not just in our hearts, but officially. Would you like that? The question hung in the air, filled with hope and possibility, as they waited for Malik's response. The gentle morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as Aisha stirred honey into her tea, watching Malik carefully spread peanut butter on his toast. These quiet breakfast moments had become precious routines, no longer shadowed by fear. 3 weeks had passed since the court ruling, and each day felt like learning to breathe again. "Mum, is today another paper day?" Malik asked, licking peanut butter from his thumb. Aisha smiled, handing him a napkin. "Yes, sweetheart. We're meeting with Ms. Rodriguez this afternoon to sign more adoption forms." Caleb entered the kitchen, his tie slightly crooked, a small detail that made him more human, more family than CEO. He poured himself coffee while ruffling Malik's hair. "Ready for your presentation today, buddy?" Malik nodded eagerly. "I practiced 3 times. Miss Thompson says I can bring my solar system model to show the whole class." The transformation in her son amazed Aisha daily. Gone was the anxious child who spoke in whispers. In his place was a boy who raised his hand in class, made friends at recess, and talked about future science fairs with sparkling eyes. "I have something for both of you," Caleb said, pulling out 2 manila envelopes. These came from HR this morning. Aisha opened hers with steady hands. Another change, she noticed. Inside was paperwork confirming her new position as Community Outreach Director for the Whitmore Foundation. No more cleaning in shadows, no more hiding. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, though her voice held excitement rather than doubt. "You have a master's degree in social work, Aisha. Your experience and compassion are exactly what the foundation needs." Caleb's voice was firm but gentle. "Plus, you start next month, after we return from family counseling in Denver." The word family still caught her off guard sometimes, not with fear, but with gratitude. Their weekly sessions with Dr. Bennett had helped them all navigate their new dynamics. Malik spoke more openly about his fears. Caleb learned to recognize triggers and provide space when needed. And Aisha, she was learning to trust happiness. Later that afternoon, they sat in their lawyer's office, surrounded by adoption papers. Ms. Rodriguez smiled warmly as she explained. "Each document. Once these are processed, Malik will legally be your son, Mr. Whitmore. His birth certificate will be updated to reflect this." Malik sat between them, swinging his legs, clutching his favorite dinosaur toy, a gift from Caleb during their first weekend as a family. "Will my last name be Whitmore too?" "If that's what you want, sweetheart," Aisha said softly. "Can I still keep Monroe in the middle? Like Mom does now?" Caleb knelt beside his chair. "You can keep any name you want, buddy. What matters is that we're family, paper or no paper." As they signed document after document, Aisha remembered another day of signatures months ago, their wedding day. How different things felt now. That day had been about survival. This day was about belonging. The following week brought more changes. Aisha stood in front of their bedroom mirror, practicing her presentation for the foundation's board meeting. She had reclaimed her original name, Aisha Lynn Monroe Whitmore, and with it came a strength she'd forgotten she possessed. "You're going to do great," Caleb said from the doorway. "The domestic violence shelter proposal is excellent." She turned to face him, straightening her blazer. "It feels right, using my experience to help others. I just hope the board sees the necessity." "They will." He stepped closer, adjusting her necklace, a simple pearl pendant he'd given her last week. "You know what to say because you've lived it. That authenticity matters." Their relationship had grown slowly, naturally, built on small moments of trust. A touch that no longer made her flinch. Conversations that stretched late into the night. prayer times that became opportunities for vulnerability. They were learning each other's rhythms, respecting boundaries while gradually allowing walls to lower. Malik thrived in this new atmosphere of security. His teacher reported improved concentration and social skills. He joined the science club, made playdates with classmates, and stopped checking windows for danger. At night, he slept peacefully in his room, decorated with solar system decals and dinosaur posters. One evening, as they worked on his science homework, Malik asked, "Dad, when the adoption is done, will you be my real dad?" Caleb set down the pencil, giving the question the weight it deserved. "I'm already your real dad in my heart, buddy. The adoption just makes it official on paper. But being real isn't about papers. It's about love and showing up every day. Like how you come to my soccer practice." "Exactly. And help with homework, and kiss your forehead at night, and love you no matter what." Aisha listened from the doorway, her heart full. This was what safety looked like, not just locks and security systems, but the everyday certainty of being loved. Finally, the day arrived. They dressed carefully for court, Malik in a new suit that matched Caleb's, Aisha in a pale blue dress that made her feel strong. The courthouse halls were familiar now, but this time they walked them with joy rather than fear. The judge who had granted their restraining order months ago smiled as they entered her chambers. "Well, if it isn't my favorite family, are we ready to make it official?" Malik nodded solemnly, standing between Caleb and Aisha. The judge explained each step simply, making sure he understood what adoption meant. When she asked if he wanted Caleb to be his legal father, Malik's "yes" echoed off the walls. As the final papers were signed and stamped, Aisha felt tears slip down her cheeks. Happy tears. Healing tears. Caleb squeezed her hand, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Their journey from arranged marriage to true family hadn't been easy, but every step had been worth it. The judge stood, official document in hand. "By the power vested in me by the state, I hereby declare this adoption final and complete. Congratulations, Malik Monroe Whitmore. You are officially, legally, and forever the son of Caleb James Whitmore." Malik launched himself into Caleb's arms, and Aisha wrapped her arms around them both. They stood there, holding each other, a family sealed by more than law, sealed by choice, by faith, and by love that had grown in the most unexpected soil. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows of the Whitmore Estate's dining room, painting golden stripes across the oak table where 3 place settings waited. The aroma of fresh-baked bread and herb-roasted chicken filled the air as Aisha moved gracefully between kitchen and dining room, no longer carrying the weight of constant vigilance in her shoulders. "Need any help, Mom?" Malik called from where he sat doing homework, his pencil tapping thoughtfully against his math workbook. At 7 years old, his eyes held a brightness that spoke of security and joy rather than the shadowed wariness of the past. "I've got it, sweetheart," Aisha replied, her voice warm and steady. She paused to run a gentle hand over his dark curls, marveling at how much he'd grown in the past year. The front door opened, and Malik's face lit up at the familiar sound of Caleb's footsteps. "Dad's home!" he exclaimed, abandoning his multiplication tables to race toward the entryway. Caleb caught Malik in a bear hug, his briefcase forgotten by the door. "There's my boy," he said, his tie already loosened and his usual corporate precision softened by the love in his eyes. "How was school today?" "I got an A on my science project." Malik beamed. "The one you helped me with about plants growing toward light." "That's wonderful." Caleb's pride was evident as he set Malik down and walked with him toward the dining room, one hand resting protectively on his son's shoulder. The gesture was natural now, no longer tentative or unsure. Aisha watched them from the doorway, her heart full. The fear that had been her constant companion for so many years had gradually given way to peace, like ice melting in spring sunshine. She remembered the woman she'd been just a year ago, cleaning these same rooms in silence, trying to make herself invisible, desperate for safety, but never daring to hope for joy. "Something smells amazing," Caleb said, meeting her eyes with a smile that held nothing but warmth. He crossed the room to kiss her cheek, and she leaned into the gentle touch without flinching. These casual displays of affection had evolved naturally, built on foundation of trust and respect rather than obligation. They settled around the table, no longer separated by invisible barriers of class or circumstance. Malik chattered about his day, secure in the knowledge that both his parents wanted to hear every detail. His laughter rang out freely, filling corners of the house that had once held only echoes of formal business discussions. The quarterly reports looked good today, Caleb mentioned as he passed the bread basket. "The new community outreach program you developed is making a real difference," Aisha nodded, thinking of her work at the company's charitable foundation, where she now helped other families escaping domestic violence. "We're opening another safe house next month," she said. "The funding came through yesterday." "That's because Mom is awesome," Malik declared with absolute certainty, making both his parents smile. Caleb's expression grew thoughtful as he looked between his wife and son. "You know, I used to think power was about control," he said quietly. "About making decisions that affected stock prices and corporate mergers, but real strength." He reached for Aisha's hand across the table. "Real strength is choosing love even when it costs you something. It's standing firm when it would be easier to walk away." Aisha squeezed his fingers, remembering the day he'd found her packed bag and refused to let fear drive them apart. "Shall we say grace?" she suggested, her voice thick with emotion. They joined hands, forming an unbroken circle. Malik's small fingers were warm and trusting in hers, while Caleb's grip was steady and sure. Aisha closed her eyes, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Dear Heavenly Father," she began, her voice clear and strong, "we thank you not for material blessings, though we are grateful for those too. We thank you for the gift of redemption, for second chances, for the peace that comes from knowing we are exactly where we're meant to be. Thank you for turning our pain into purpose, our fears into faith, and our broken pieces into something beautiful. Thank you for this family, chosen and cherished. Amen." "Amen," Malik echoed cheerfully, reaching for his milk glass. "Dad, can we play chess after dinner? You promised to teach me that new move." "Of course," Caleb answered without hesitation, his face softening at the simple word. Dad. It was a title he'd earned through countless small moments of patience and protection, through nightmares soothed and questions answered, through love given freely without demands, the dining room filled with easy conversation and the gentle clink of silverware. Outside, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and pink, but inside, the warmth came from something deeper than daylight. It radiated from 3 hearts that had learned to beat in harmony, from souls that had found their way home to each other. Here, in this space, transformed by compassion and chosen love, they were more than survivors. They were a family, bound together by something stronger than law or obligation. Their story was one of redemption, of faith rewarded, of love that built bridges across every divide. In their shared laughter and quiet moments of understanding, they had created something precious and rare. A peace that passed all understanding, a joy that could only come from being exactly where they belonged. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.